Hi everyone, I'm going to start talking a little bit now about the influences of the global IT aspect on warfare and more importantly social change. It's one of the most powerful things that we're seeing today happen and continue to happen throughout the world. Let's think about right now how our world is a little bit different here in America. First, you have U.S. Cyber Command, PSYOPs, is what a lot of people understand it to be. You have the orchestration of the NSA, National Security Association, Homeland Security. Very much different things have happened, and all because of information warfare. Today, they're calling cyber ops the fifth domain of the military. One of its main cures is actually looking for misinformation tactics and security on the borders through cyber only. We look at how today there's so many influencing factors. We talked about the economics of how if our banking industry is attacked and Wall Street is brought down, what it would mean to the world market. What it means in the world market if we don't have access to information about global environments just for our food. If California can't access when it's going to rain and planting seasons can change or they plant too early, we might lose all of our crops for the year. Our nation could starve. All this information can be at a fingertip or a stroke of a finger destroyed. This data, this planning. If you look back historically, and I love looking at history, there was an interesting program to where a Russian defector had come to our border for help, and he was a physicist specialist, so naturally we gave him aid. And it ended up the CIA brought him inside of its wings and brought him to being a counter-terrorism mechanism for us, and had him go and start talking to universities and going to different conferences, and along this pathway made connections with Iranian nuclear physicists who at the time were trying to build their first nuclear bomb and their first nuclear power plants, and trying to get all this information about how to use uranium and different mechanisms to actually create the bomb. One of the counterterrorism ideas, we had less technology, was sending this man to conferences to meet people, and eventually the CIA had wrote the plans out on a paper, but when they did this, they wrote in code and information that would foil the actual mission of building a bomb and set them back by what they figured 7 to 8 years at least, thinking that they had our plans on how to do everything. Unfortunately, on the train from, I believe it was England to Paris, where the physicist was going to drop at the embassy, for Iranian embassy, the information and leave it go into the hands of Iranian officials, he saw the error when he opened up the code and was able to figure it out, scratched everything out, rewrote the whole entire correct procedures and plans for this action, and gave it to the Iran. So it actually was a low-tech version of cyber technology defenses and acquisitions of misinformation. Today was one of the biggest boo-boos in our country where we actually gave them our plans. These handwritten ideas were, never thought to be erased. Just like today, we can implement different things, and you're going to see how the CIA actually worked with Israeli cyber programs to again try to thwart that nuclear program that's happening in Iran. And that's where that Strugen net kind of worm was developed, and it was actually a co-op between us and Israeli technology to plant this inside the Iran program and destroy their computers. And it spun down the computers, the hard drive, and froze everything in hopes that they would lose all their data. So these are tactics today that are very different. Our war is not how we used to. If you think of the Revolutionary War, you had blue coats and the red coats. They'd line up across the field, very gentlemanly stand and shoot each other. Today it's not like that. It is a war of information, of data, of zeros and ones. It is a constant battlefield that is never ending either, 24/7, whether it's drones flying over or someone working a keypad. A good friend of mine, and he is a military commander for the Navy, Dr. Mark Reeves, is actually in charge of naval health care for Native Americans. His main core and job is protecting the data of these individuals. He says on a daily basis he'll have 3 to 4 attacks from North Korea alone, trying to infiltrate the data sources there. Why? Because if you get inside one of these ports in the military, you can spiderweb to all the others. Amazing. It's kind of thinking about a backdoor action as how they're trying to do this and sneak in. So one of his biggest jobs is protecting the cyber programs that they have at the Navy for healthcare. This is all part of plans that we don't even understand today on a larger scale. One of the amazing things that happened, and everybody hears this term Arab Spring, and I'm kind of going to go through this to let you see how important social media and IT in a global scale has become, to how it's changing and influencing the world today. Everybody's heard about these uprisings, the Green Revolution in Iran, the protests on social media of police brutality. Women protesters in Libya in 2012 were able to utilize social media to actually have a voice. We've seen this in Saudi Arabia as well. In many different cases, it was a lesser cause, but was a greater cause because of the unification of many women across the globe were able to help these few individuals. We've seen how Algiers was able to post about the brutalities that happened against women who tried to speak out just to learn how to vote, and get a chance to vote. And they were able to expose this information. So this virtual global society is actual social protest. It's becoming one of the main drivers and influences in changing the world, changing social, changing race lines, international issues. Look at Women to Drive campaign in Saudi. This recently happened not too long ago and is still continuing. It has grassroots everywhere from America across the globe, trying to influence the government there to allow women to have more freedom. Very interesting. It's a very different culture there, but women across the globe believe that they all should be able to drive a vehicle, to have the freedom to do what they want, to wear the clothes they want, the shoes that they want to wear, to be comfortable, to have a good education, to be allowed all these things that everyone else is allowed. The global campaign is continuing. If you Google it, you'll find all this movement. You'll find additional movements that are happening today. One of the big ones that are happening right now is Black Lives Matter, because of the violence that's happened in America against young African Americans. Police are looking at themselves right now and saying, are we out of line? Yes. They're trying to understand how the social movement is so strong because everybody has access to information technology resources today, from public libraries to home uses on cell phones. One of the great things I love to look at, because I went through this, it was interesting, was Hosni Mubarak's overthrow. It was actually a young man in Chicago who was bringing out this overthrow and getting the message out on Facebook and different social media aspects. The Egyptian government was trying to squash the protests against Hosni Mubarak's treatment of them. And what ended up happening was the internet was shut down. Remember, we were talking about these small infrastructures of internets and how they can influence global culture and or stop them last lecture. Well, here it happened. Vodafone is a system, and the president of Vodafone helped dissolve this idea. When they shut down the internet, it actually caused a greater concern. Everyone was not allowed to have a voice. The control by the government was extreme. The Vodafone's president helped get out all this information by using their SMS message technology. So everybody was still able to get messages out. It was collected by John Scott, and he was posting them daily on the internet, updating everyone. So it was kind of a virtual coverage. NPR was posting on Twitter the messages they were receiving from people on their phones from their Twitter accounts. Virtual student conversations in real time with other students was happening as well. And this was done through phone technology. I was in a classroom in Pennsylvania and watched where two different schools united. And they were able to talk and have conversations about what was happening at the time in real time and how the students had fear to voice out or say anything because of the government control, fear for their lives. It was an incredible movement to watch nationally from here, and a global movement where we're all starting to try to get intertwined and help these students and people. Amazingly enough, the Vodafone's president was one of the ones who helped the most by allowing everybody to continue those messaging services. They even tried national curfews to stop people from being outside. Google stepped in with Speak to Tweet Network. It kind of reminds me of history again. I love to throw this back, of Daniel Shays. And in the days of the UN here, they weren't allowed to have a voice. But if you looked at the information technology and information systems back then, there was only one. It was the penny presses. And they were all mostly controlled by the government, to where only uh, members of the parliament or the government here, the leaders, were allowed to write in the front pages. And so coming off the Revolutionary War, you had all these yeomen, farmers, that were being imprisoned because they couldn't pay for their taxes because their fields weren't worked and they couldn't get crops to sell. So they had taxation with no representation came about, of course, and they were thrown in jail for this. So now their farms went defunct. They were further in jail. And finally, when a few of the men got out, like Daniel Shays, they used the technology of the day, many information systems, and they bought ads in the newspapers. And you can trace this back in the Massachusetts Gazette still to today in the National Archives. I've done this. And you can see where they bought ads every week and said, join together with Daniel Shays and bear arms at Springfield, cause a revolution. Similar today, but just a different media, what they're doing of social media on Facebook. Muammar Gaddafi was another famous, very political, brutal leader. And Benghazi was an area where the oppositions were led. And many political figures band together to try to stop this regime. There was former academics and attorneys, even politicians and business leaders that joined together to try to get NATO at the time to help them. Eventually, Gaddafi was overthrown and rebels actually captured and killed him. But this came out of a social media rooted aspect to get help from National Transitional Council, where they reached out to NATO and many of other countries to actually influence this departing, I would say, more running from, at the time of Muammar Gaddafi. Another one who was seen with atrocities was Slobodan Milosevic's regime in Serbia. The activists actually worked together, and they used the P2P networks, which was traditionally used for music sharing, if you think about it, to get messages out for help. An amazing grassroots area that happened with the technology there, where they were sharing media platforms for music. These police states were happening everywhere, and this is kind of the root of where the Arab Springs came from. If we looked at specifically the case of the Egyptian police, they were doing amazingly terrible, heinous things at the time. They were doing cyber traps because they knew people were banding together using social media to actually get their messages out, especially LGBT individuals. And they started targeting gay and lesbian individuals in chat rooms and using false identifications and actually trying to act together to get them to be in a relationship with them. And when the individuals would come to meet their significant other who they thought they were coming to meet for the first time, they would ambush them. They would use McDonald's in Cairo a lot of times to actually trap these individuals and beat them and imprison them. The same things was happening in Tunisia. The activists were having the same things happen to them. There was roundups. The difference was it was Starbucks that lead them to, and then when they got them there, they would arrest them all, or the protesters would all say to come to Starbucks at this time in this place, and it was falsely done by police, and they would arrest everyone, have them there, and baton them. One of the strongest and most interesting aspects was a young man that lost his life during all this, in a great movement that was called All Khalid Salif, or Siad, how you say it, I'm sorry. And Muhammad was just a wonderful boy, and he's very smart and intuitive, and used cyber domains to get his message out and talk about the atrocities that were happening at the time. It was, unfortunately, his death came at a cyber cafe where police had tracked him down because of his IP address, saw where he was broadcasting from, on the internet, his messages and his media, and they went and attacked him. It was in June 2010. They drug him out of the cyber cafe, taken his computer, threw him against a wall, smashed his head off the ground, beat him, and bludgeoned him to death. Images of his corpse were broadcast actually out on social media, and there was a gigantic outrage over this entire aspect of what happened to this young man. Eventually, 2 of the Egyptian police officers were held in court and found guilty of manslaughter, and they were sentenced to 7 years in prison. which is really nothing to lose a young man's life over this. But more importantly, this young man started a movement across the globe that caused the Egyptian revolutions in 2011, where Hosni Mubarak was actually overthrown because of his death. It really got people to think and join together, and we saw these motions and actions come together and alive. It also dissolved the parliament there. It was an amazing feat that happened by a young man after his death, but his death brought on all this social change. Looking at the Arab Spring and the idea of that, to get you guys an understanding of how important global information sharing and the IT aspect really is in social media revolutions, which is one of the largest things still happening today, even in more grassroots programs to help individuals get access to computers and better schools or better water, such as Michigan we're seeing. Look at this list. In Tunisia, the prime minister was overthrown. Algeria, there were states of emergencies lifted. People had freedoms again. Jordan, the king fired the prime minister and his whole cabinet. Oman, the economic concessions were lifted by the Sultan. Egypt, the overthrow of Hosni Mubarak was one of the most memorable ones. We saw in Yemen the prime minister was thrown out. Sudan, its president resigned. Iraq's prime minister resigned. The civil war had started. It's still in uproar today. Bahrain, political prisoners were released. Libya, we saw Muammar Gaddafi was ousted, later attacked by rebels and killed. We saw many of different resignations in Kuwait. We saw Syria release more political prisoners because of protests on a global scale that was run through Facebook again. In Palestine, we saw more resignations of prime ministers. In Saudi, there was economic concessions by King Abdullah, who's gone now. In Israel, we can see that today there's still Arab demonstrations on the borders. Many of these things have all happened because of a global workforce on Facebook, on social networks, using Twitter, getting messages out where we never could before. So global messaging today and information technology is one of the most important things to not only start warfare, but make change across the globe. Look at how initiatives are started today in Africa to get clean water. Look at how they're looking at chemicals or what's being put into fracking, and the initiatives are out with people sharing information about when they get sick and what's happening to them. Look at differences in industries being fought for polluting in the air. Just think about how whistleblowers are able to use this technology to share information at WikiLeaks. It's amazing the things we are seeing and uncovering. And all because we have a medium of communication that information technology is allowing us to do on a national scale and a global scale, more importantly. And everybody and anybody can get involved. Gang, I hope you enjoyed this little lecture. It's something a little bit different, and it sparks a little bit more interest. I'll be doing another one shortly, a little bit more on the warfare idea. I'll be bringing some other topics and interesting points into view next week. And I'll start bringing in the idea of terrorism and how we can actually look at terrorism and what it is doing us today. I'll be looking at the idea of communication factors in IT and how it has also helped people and it's changed the way we're living in life and going to change down the road. Have a great day, everyone. Get out there, get some sunshine, do something for yourself, ride a bike, go for a run, take a walk, go fishing. We'll talk to you again soon.